There's a kind of homelessness that doesn't look like homelessness. It doesn't happen under a bridge. It happens indoors, under the white lights that can never turn off, behind a thin wall that you can knock on with 2 fingers. And it's the kind where you can still charge your phone, still wash your face, and still buy a drink. And that's exactly why it stays invisible. In Japan, people call them net cafe refugees, the people who sleep in 24-hour internet cafes because rent is simply too expensive. Fumiya is 26. His job is a security guard in construction sites, day-to-day assignments, whatever comes up. Now he tried to rent a place at first, but the numbers didn't make sense. Deposits, key money, and guarantors, it stacks up fast, so he did what a lot of people do when they can't make the math work. He told himself it would be temporary, and he moved into a net cafe. Now he says he used to go to net cafes even before this, so it doesn't feel like a huge leap, but the first night still hit him. You don't really rest, and the sound doesn't stop. Someone washing, someone walking, or someone coughing in the next booth. Because it's not just loud, it's worse than loud, because it's constant. Now Fumiya has tried to save money, but it's not surprising that it all disappears by the end of the month. Now the cafes adapted this in the mid-2000s. When more people started doing this, they added showers, laundry, overnight packages. Now in a normal economy, those are amenities, but in this one, they're life support. Now Fumiya says the biggest strength is simple. The facilities are good and the price is reasonable. You get power outlets, a roof, and a place you can exist without anyone asking questions. And then he says something that sounds hopeful, but it's also a deadline. I can't be part-time forever. He wants to skill up and he wants to become a full-time employee.
気楽でいいと思いますね。気にすることなく電気も使えるような感じで。さすがにいつまでもアルバイトでもいられませんから、これからもうちょっとスキルアップをしていって、いずれ正社員になれるように頑張っていこうとは思いますね。
Now a researcher explains why this became a social issue. The rise starts in the late 1990s, and it becomes impossible to ignore by the mid-2000s. Non-regular workers make up a huge share of the labor force, contract, temp, and part-time, and the pay and security are fundamentally weaker than regular employment. But here's the trap, and it's brutal in how logical it is. If you're a non-regular, your wages often don't rise the way regular wages do, and when you lose work, the safety net doesn't catch you in the same way. It becomes a life where one bad month isn't tight, it's homeless. Now jump forward to 2020. This is where the story turns into something that feels like a bad experiment. When COVID hit and Japan declared emergency measures, internet cafes closed or had restricted hours, and suddenly the people using them as homes got pushed out all at once. Now some people went to public shelters like gymnasiums and halls. Reports described men who had nowhere else to go, people who had been staying quietly at designated cafes and then lost that space overnight. Now a Tokyo nonprofit and advocates warned that cyber homeless were basically losing their homes because the cafes were not available. The Tokyo government arranged hotel rooms for some, but reporting at the time stressed that supply was limited compared to the need. Think about what that means emotionally. If you're living in a net cafe, you're living day to day already. Then a public health crisis comes, and not only the roof over your head that you could afford disappears. That's when the invisible homelessness becomes visible, and fast. Not because people changed, but because the system removed the hiding place. And here's the part people outside this world don't understand. A net cafe isn't just a cheap room. For many, it's the only place they can actually maintain the appearance of a normal life, with a shower, a place you can charge your phone, to be indoors and apply for work. You lose all of that, and you also lose more than just a bed. Now a former salaryman appears in the older documentary and tells the other half of the story. Not just poverty, but the entire collapse. He worked at a credit card related company, and he describes overtime so extreme he stopped knowing day from night. He describes the moment you're clearly breaking down and you don't even recognize yourself doing it. Now he got counseling, and a doctor told him that his depression symptoms were serious. He explains the stigma like it's a weather system. If you take time off, some workplaces treat you like you're weak, like you're defective. Promotions stop, invitations stop, and then conversations stop altogether. And power harassment, being yelled at, humiliated, gets treated like a normal culture. You're supposed to swallow it if you want to succeed. So when people say just get a stable job, they're missing the shape of the choice. For some, it's not the stable job versus the instability that's the issue. It's the instability you can survive versus the stability that breaks you. Now the net cafe becomes a place where the broken pieces can still fit. In more of the recent years, the term net cafe refugee still shows up because the underlying conditions didn't disappear. Reporting in 2025 described this as the invisible homeless class, people without stable housing, often without secure employment, living in these 24-hour spaces because they can't access normal rentals. And manga cafes, the manga kissa, are now openly described as budget accommodation with showers and free drinks and 24-hour availability, which tells you how normalized this workaround has become. So what does more recent look like? It looks like this. People moved into cafes to survive, a pandemic forced them out, and the city scrambled with temporary shelters. And once emergency programs end, the question becomes the same one every single time. Where do people go next? Now, in the in-depth reporting from Nippon.com, it warned that hotel shelter programs were time limited and shutting down one by one, with people waiting to work to recover while the clock ran out. Now that's the thing about this kind of life. Everything has a timer. Night pack, shelter placement, short-term contract, until the next month, until that job comes back. The future is always postponed. Now Fumiya says something that sounds simple. He likes that it's easy. He doesn't have to worry. Electricity is there. But then he says it again. He can't do this forever. And the documentary makes you sit in that moment because you realize he's not saying it for the audience. He's saying it to himself. The lights never really go off. Now this is what the disposable worker means in practice. It's not a slogan and it's not meant to be a statistic. It means a society where people can work and still not have a home, where the cheapest roof is a booth designed for internet browsing, and where a crisis doesn't create the problem, it just reveals it. And if you're watching this thinking, why not just rent a room? Remember what the reporting and research kept repeating. The barriers to renting aren't only the monthly rent, it's deposits, key money, guarantors, paperwork, stability proofs. The whole system is built for people who already have stability, and a net cafe asks for money, not a life story. So the net cafe becomes the last place you can still exist without being rejected. Now this documentary isn't really about internet cafes, it's about what happens when the bottom falls out of the ordinary life, and the only thing that catches you is a cubicle with a screen. Fumiya still talks about becoming a full-time employee. The former salaryman talks about never going back. The researcher describes the trap. The pandemic proved how fragile the workaround was, and the question that hangs over it all quietly, without drama. How many people are living like this right now, in rooms we walk past without noticing? Because the scariest part is not that it's rare. The scariest part, for me personally, is that it's normal enough to hide in plain sight. Thank you for watching.